He's really put together a lot of research into a lot of these trends that we talk about at a national level. He actually can apply it to specific neighborhoods in the Charleston area. It's very fascinating.
You know, it'd be great when we can actually, you know, maybe have a commission meeting at City Hall and have somebody like Vince present to the whole commission, or
You know,
so
he would love it. He'll tell you the story about how Ion originally was going to have multifamily in it, and it was going to be mixed income. And let's just say Mount Pleasant wasn't cool with that, and they still aren't.
Yeah, we've been trying to develop in Mount Pleasant for a long time, and it just and actually we talked to Vince a long time ago about potentially doing some senior housing in Ion, but it never.
Oh, right.
Okay. Have we heard from Councilmember Gregory?
Councilmember Gregory will not be with us this evening.
Okay. All right. Well, we are live and we have a quorum.
Awesome. I'll give it another minute, see who can jump on, and then kind of just get started. Tracy, back to your question or your point about having some folks present. I think Vince, and there's probably a short list of folks that I've just been keeping track of, and it would be awesome to do that at some point.
And I'm a little torn because I feel like we're need to get, I heard the message from Councilmember Gregory, we need to get some things put forward to send to City Council. So I feel like in one way, we need to be spending our meetings working on those things that we think we could afford, rather than doing meetings where we're exploring broader. Do you know what I mean? It's like a little bit of, what do we do next?
I think I froze up. I think I'm not going to ask you to repeat what you said, but I gathered, Tracy, that you were talking about getting our recommendations in a timeline.
Yes. Well, what I was saying, did you hear me or you couldn't hear me?
I froze up on my end.
I think I'm unmuted, but yeah, what I was saying was bringing forth items on our recommendations that can come before council. I'm wondering if those things have to come first before we invite speakers to come on topics to educate fully. Do you know what I'm saying? I just don't, I'm a little torn about that.
I think the more folks we can get from the outside to come in, present, particularly on some of the recommendations that we're formulating, is a good thing. Good afternoon, Mayor.
Hey, everybody.
Happy Wednesday.
Guess where I went today?
You got your first vaccine shot.
I got my first vaccine shot. Woo-hoo. That was exciting.
So that means you must be older than 65.
You got that right. Just barely, but I qualify.
Well, congratulations. I think we'll get started. I know Amber's here. Mike's on. Councilman Gregory is not going to be joining us tonight, just so you all know. And then Elvin, you'll be up. We're going to just dive right into economic empowerment. But before we get started, I'd like to call today's 2/24/2021 commission meeting to order. I'm not sure if the minutes have been distributed. Velvet, have they been distributed?
No, those are deferred.
Okay. I guess any questions before we get started? I guess we'll do a quick moment of silence. Thanks, Velvet. Let's do just a quick moment of silence. Thank you. I'm not going to review any of the group norms and agreements. We talked about those last week. I know Mr. Harris has to jump off at 6, and Crystal is actually not available this evening as well. So we're going to spend most of tonight just kind of discussing economic empowerment and hearing from Elvin. So Elvin, with that, take it away.
Thanks, Jason. So yeah, let's just get straight to it. So basically, when we first got together as a group, we were on fire. We had 2 or 3 meetings, everybody had some great ideas. And then, we kind of figured out that, we were not necessarily focused, right? So we kind of sort of stepped back and decided, well, one, what is economic empowerment, right? So that's what you see first here is this is our working definition. So we decided that economic empowerment is the capacity of individuals to participate in, contribute to, and benefit from growth processes in ways that recognize the value of their contributions, respect their dignity, and make it possible to negotiate a fair distribution of the benefits of growth. For African Americans, economic empowerment drives freedom, control, the power to break free of systemic barriers by establishing mechanisms that support generational wealth. I'm not going to go through the entire problem statement, but basically the problem statement supports the why, right? That gives you a little bit of meat, some numbers, just straight data. And what we decided to really focus on were, we really want to focus on Black Charleston, right? So initially we were talking about how do we help Black Charleston, but then looking at the other subcommittees out there, we just kind of sort of really want to focus mostly on Black businesses. Some of our recommendations, as you'll see, will also affect the individuals outside of Black businesses. Now, mind you, there's still time, and we will be adding recommendations growing on these that will also affect individuals that aren't necessarily Black businesses. But there were four focus areas, 3 really, but then I added a 4th. The first focus area was improving access to capital. And we had a meeting last week with Mayor Tecklenburg. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, for being on.
Yes,
and I will say this, it was a very spirited meeting.
yes.
This work isn't easy work. It's not comfortable work. There's a lot of emotions and passion involved. And I mean, sometimes you have to, get into those very hard subject matters. And we really appreciate you being there for that. So our goal is to basically fund 100 brand new businesses, Black-owned businesses, over a 5-year period. One thing Mayor Tecklenburg challenged us on was 100 is not enough, right? So we're going to be looking at having increasing that number, but certainly we really believe that there should be more Black-owned businesses in the greater Charleston area. Some of the strategies for doing that will be to establish a minority business guarantee fund and trust. And here's the challenge, right? Where you get the money from. So we've actually met with Optus Bank, which is a Black-owned bank out of Columbia, South Carolina. A couple of my subcommittee members have a meeting with them, having great conversations. And some of the stuff that you see here is a direct result of those meetings with Optus Bank. Leveraging private sector capital, and basically having the city hire dedicated grant writer, right? So that we can go out there and get that money. Help Black businesses, owners become building owners, right? So the whole idea behind that is basically you can have a business here in Charleston for 50, 60 years. And let's say that time comes that you want to close the doors or you want to move. So now you have this building that was leased or rented, but you never owned that building. So one of our beliefs towards how do you become generational wealthy is through real estate ownership. And as a Black-owned business, it just makes sense that the goal should be to be able to own the building that you're operating out of. And there's some information there as well. We can come back to that later on. Reparations. This wasn't necessarily the hard one, but it took a while for it to come up in conversation. And I say that because the R word kind of sort of triggers a lot of emotions from both, Black and brown people and white people as well. So we were very, very delicate at first, but then we just decided that we just got to dive into it, right? You can't talk about this work. You can't talk about economic empowerment without mentioning reparations. And the root of the word reparation isn't repay, but it's repair. So that's the focus. Like, we're trying to repair some of these gaps that exist simply because of the color of somebody's skin. So we looked at a couple of areas, right? We looked at universal basic income. I believe Compton, the city of Compton in California actually has this. They have a very young progressive mayor. And it was just something that she kind of really just dove into. This could be, a challenge here, certainly, but like I say always, like this isn't going to be easy, and it's probably not going to be popular either. So some things, we're just going to have to dive into. Individual development accounts, and I will be honest with you guys, some of this stuff is above my pay grade. I have a really good subcommittee. There's a lot of people on there that are in that the banking industry, real estate industry, and this was one thing that Bernie Mazik actually brought up and is a passion of his. And I mentioned Optus Bank earlier, established a Black-owned bank here in Charleston. I do believe that we need a physical presence, a place that individuals can go into, cash checks. And I say that because if we have payday lending institutions that you can walk into, if you have title loan institutions that you can walk into, then you certainly need a banking institution that people feel comfortable walking into. I know we're in the 21st century, people do banking mobily, but everybody doesn't have the same level of access. So part of equity is meeting people where they are. So that's something I think we should really consider as well. So the second focus area was political empowerment and leadership development. And the goal here is to support Black business development, startups, and expanding existing businesses. We didn't just want to focus on new businesses, right? We want to focus on the businesses that are here currently and be sure that we give them the resources that they need so that they can be successful, right? You want to get past that 1-2 year mark to where you're generating capital, building your brand, and then trying to figure out how do we as a city support these businesses. One thing that we talked about was the Business Opportunity Center. Ms. Ruth Jordan actually did a presentation on this center. So basically that's the Business Opportunity Center was from Bernie Mazik. So basically it's an incubator space on the peninsula where you can host conferences, multiple offices, common spaces, pop-up retail. Black-owned businesses will be able to come into this space at a very low cost. And then therefore they won't have to incur, some of the same costs that are associated with having to be able to do business in the city of Charleston. As you guys probably know, that can be a pretty penny. Business to business mentoring programs was something else that we talked about as well. And then expansion of marketing and events. So basically, how do we help market Black-owned businesses, right? Giving that additional resources to those businesses and just basically celebrating Black-owned businesses in the city of Charleston. The third focus area, improving government contracting and spending protocols. The goal here is just to basically be intentional about ensuring Black businesses have the opportunities to pursue and win government contracts and projects. So we would really like to a couple of things. One, change the policy for classification for minority-owned businesses from 2 years to 1 year. So personally speaking, when I first started my business years ago, that was a barrier, right? There was a couple of programs and projects that were coming out, and companies were reaching out wanting to partner so they could check the box, but I wasn't quite yet qualified, right? I had to be in business for 2 years. And we all know that the first 2 years of being in business, those are your most difficult years. So changing that requirement from 2 years to 1 year, we think would be something that will benefit Black-owned businesses here in Charleston. Prioritizing diversity study to generate data and metrics on women and minority-owned businesses in the city of Charleston, and also establish a system to basically track MWBE spending. That was something that came up in our conversation with Ms. Ruth Jordan. There were some projects in which they did have those metrics on, but then there were a lot of other projects in which they didn't. So it's kind of hard to have this goal and hold prime contractors to this standard if once the process is done, once the project is complete, if like you can't come back and demonstrate how you achieve, said goals. That was actually something that was really frustrating for me to find out personally, because I also operate as I work for AECOM, and we are the City of Charleston Stormwater Program Manager, and I serve as the MWBE liaison for the program. And one of my duties is to basically be sure that we are utilizing MWBEs, and we have this target utilization goal, which is actually 7% above what the stated target is for the City of Charleston, which is 20%. Our goal is 27%. And it was kind of frustrating just to find out that, yes, we are committed to that goal, but it doesn't quite necessarily seem that the city is as committed because the resources aren't necessarily being put there to actually track this data. So we need to be able to track that information. And then the International African American Museum was another subject matter as well. How do we generate revenue from the museum that gets directly back into the Black community? I think some of the frustration here was you have this great venue that's being constructed that's going to tell part of the Black story. Notice I said part of the Black story, right? But how does Black Charleston benefit from this venue, right? I mean, people are going to come here, they're going to patronize the space, and then they're going to leave and go spend their money in hotels in Charleston and businesses in Charleston. We think that there should be some type of effort to where they should, be not necessarily pushed, but we advertise and promote the Black success stories in Charleston, which are our Black-owned businesses as well. So something else to think about. And this last one was something that I added, accountability. Basically, create a system in which the city will be held accountable to ensure it continues to move equity, inclusion, and racial conciliation forward. Some things that we think would be beneficial here would be to have a resolution from the City of Charleston stating their commitment to this work. And this resolution will be conspicuously displayed in all city buildings and properties, right? So whether you live in the city or whether you are visiting the city, you need to see that the city is committed to moving this type of work forward. I don't know how much traction this next one will get, but the creation of an ED&I department, where the current EIRC manager will become the department head, and the Office of Minority Women and Business Enterprise would also fall under this department. And then the third one would be basically dropping the special from the Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation Commission and making it a permanent commission within the City of Charleston. And then finally, whatever report that we generate, the final report from this commission will become a living document and will be updated as needed, as determined by the commission that is established, the Commission of Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation. So economic empowerment, I mean, it's such a broad subject, right? I mean, but like I said earlier, we can talk about a criminal justice reform, education reform, bridging disparity gaps when it comes to health, housing, but unless you have money, I mean, you're going to end up exactly right back where we are. So we have to figure out, how do we get capital? How do we get money? How do we increase access to capital to the Black community in the city of Charleston? If we don't address this, like I said, or at least if we don't put the effort towards addressing this, we might end up, right back where we are in no time. So 5, 10, 15 years down the road, money has to be part of the equation. So,
So, question: the recommendations or the interim report, preliminary recommendations, were those ranked in order of priority? I mean, number 1 and 2 was access to capital and real estate.
so Jason, that was actually something that came up as a result of our meeting with the mayor last week, was having some type of ranking system, right? But then also prioritizing just based off of things that we can do now, short-term goals versus long-term goals. But as you kind of sort of see it here, no, it's not ranked.
Okay. I mean, it seems to me, to your point, number 1, the access to capital is probably the key linchpin for all of this. Any thoughts or reactions to what Alvin?
If I could, Mr. Chair, the business development and access to capital is one aspect of impacting the wealth gap disparity, but it's not the only one. And when I look at the reparations, the basic universal income discussion, perhaps the individual development accounts, not that you guys need more work, Alvin, perhaps exploding out a wealth/reparations agenda. I know, for example, that there's a national proposal for the creation of something called baby bonds, which begins to make investment in children at a young age, so that as they mature, their wealth development capital is there. So that's one thing that I think I would suggest, perhaps pulling out, differentiating between business capital development as a wealth generator, as opposed to other strategies that might be addressed. And we may not be able to articulate all of them, but if we could identify them, it would be helpful. I think the Prosperity Now data that Bernie can provide you with could provide the basis for that discussion.
Thank you, Jerome. And can I add this? And I left this out earlier, but whenever we originally were talking about this fund, the original intent wasn't just for it to solely be for like business, right? Initially, yes, it'd be for business, but we would also want to be able to like have this fund so that we can also, education, transportation, housing, things of that nature. The whole point of the fund is so that it can grow to kind of sort of encompass all things, not just Black businesses, but that's just kind of sort of where we're starting from. So I guess perhaps I could probably expand on that a little bit as well.
Hi, Alvin. I had just a clarifying question. You mentioned that in the plan, you mentioned the African American Museum. And just asking, will there be vendors in the museum, much like they have at the National Museum in DC? And could we consider making sure that a percentage of those vendors are Black owned?
So that would require us to actually have a meeting with the International African American Museum. And that's something that we've been working on for the past couple of weeks. But yes, I mean, that would basically be the point, right? Have some type of commitment to where you have a certain percentage of your vendors in the museum that are Black owned businesses. We met with Friends of the Lowline a couple of weeks ago, and they actually reached back out to me as well. And they're also want to take that same approach, right? As we look at developing that area, we want to be intentional about, attracting, Black owned vendors to some of these kiosk spaces that they're going to have set up. So, yes, Kimberly, that's kind of the light point, right? We just have to have that meeting with those folks.
And does that include our sweetgrass basket crafters that often are side the road? I don't know if they're formal businesses, but will they have an opportunity to engage as well in the museum?
That will certainly be my hope, and that's a great point. And if and when we can get those folks on, that'd be something that we can certainly bring up. I mean, because that's a direct connection to the past, really, right? But yeah, great point.
Alvin, if I may ask, what has been the challenge in trying to schedule that meeting? Is it you just started that process, or do you feel like you?
Hold on, my laptop's going out. It actually came up a while back, to be quite honest with you, and I take full responsibility for why we haven't scheduled that meeting yet. So yes, we can actually work on trying to get that meeting scheduled over the next, I guess, 4 weeks that we have. We are in the process of trying to get CBB back for a second meeting. We have reached out to Helen Hill and she has agreed to meet, but we're just trying to figure out the, I guess, how that process is going to work out for everybody. So we just got to try to figure out, how we get those guys on the schedule.
Alvin, one thing that has come up in some of our discussions with folks on the east side when they're talking about all the new development happening over there is that there are a lot of small contractors, individuals who have construction skills, but they can't compete because they don't have the ability to bond. They don't have any bond capacity. And so there was some discussion about how do you form some sort of coalition of those folks and maybe create a thing where they can all come together and have bonding capacity so that they can actually bid on jobs and benefit from all of the construction that is going on. And I don't know if that's something that you guys have looked at, but Reverend Rivers spoke to us about that and also heard that from the East Side Neighborhood Association when we met with them some time ago. So I just think if we could figure out a way that they can participate, even single family redevelopment or the bigger construction jobs to be able to compete. That's the way to expand economic development.
Yeah, and I could be way off on this one, but that's I mean, if this fund, gets funded the way that I would kind of sort of hope that it would. Of course, it wouldn't happen this year and next year, but that could be something that the city could potentially leverage to be able to help some of these contractors get the bonding capacity needed to be able to prime some of these contracts. So yeah, that's always been an issue, especially when we're talking about large capital projects. Is these guys, these women, they have the skill set, but they just don't have the bonding capacity.
That's right.
So that's been a major barrier. That's always been here. I mean, for the longest, and yeah, we just have to get creative as to how we can do it.
And number 2 point, the Entrepreneurial in Residence program. I think, I look at Humanities Foundation, for example, and we have AmeriCorps volunteers and folks who we have come through our organization from time to time. And sometimes they stay with us as employees and sometimes they move on. But we would love to participate in a program where minorities could learn the affordable housing business. And, I think we certainly can do a better job of seeking out minority volunteers or, employees. But I think if there was a way that we could tap into something like this, I think there are a lot of companies that would want to do that. Certainly we would, so.
Alvin, if I could ask a question or two and then share a couple, I think, good developments. Alvin, you mentioned Optus Bank up in Columbia and the goal to open a minority bank here in Charleston. You know, I to the president a couple of years ago, and at that time they just wanted to do a lending office here, like a commercial office like you would find.
Is that me or did the mayor freeze?
I think the mayor froze.
Okay, all right. Just wanted to say.
It's that shot.
Does this mean does this mean Carol's the mayor now?
Yeah.
We got to call Carol. Was there any question before the mayor gets back on? Did anyone else have a quick question? I do want to welcome Councilman Waring, who just joined us. Hey, Keith.
Just to note that naturally, Alvin, there's some great synergy that's going to be able to take place with the work you guys are doing, especially in the area of, building out better policy recommendations as it regards to contracts and response to certain proposals and quotes and things of that nature. So I'm really looking forward to being able to have that conversation with you, because we've had those conversations in the past about make things like, instead of a certain percentage goal, making it a floor. And so if you don't particularly hit that percentage point, then you're forfeiting a certain amount of those dollars. That kind of thing. That's Chip there, everybody. He wanted to be on the record apparently. So he feels strongly about these policy recommendations. The other point that you made that I think, and I just sent you the contact information for Elijah, who's the COO over at the International American Museum. So, that also falls well in line with some of the work we're going to do. So just looking forward to kind of continue that work as we start to blend the work of the subcommittees together. That's going to be important, because we also agree with you that the commission needs to go on and it gets to that whole sustainability and accountability part that you were referring to.
Thanks, John. I think the mayor's joining us now. Anyone else have any quick question before mayor gets back on? Well, Alvin, as the mayor joins us, I did have when you guys were thinking about funding sources, can you just kind of articulate a little bit more about some potential buckets of money that you thought that you could tap into or at least create?
Well, I think I mentioned this a while back on a commission call before the end of 2020. I try not to say that word. It's like a 4-letter word, but yeah. So there's a couple of things you can do, right? I mean, the city can take a certain percentage of its internal revenues, right, and they can put that aside and just have that set aside for, just Black Charleston. We have been in conversation with, there's a local group of clergy here in the city of Charleston. I'm actually meeting with them again tomorrow. They've been kind of sort of moved in the social justice space, and they're looking to take a certain percentage of their church budget every year and increasing that by 1% up until, they haven't told me what that ceiling is, but they want to put it towards reparations. They don't necessarily know what that looks like. So they did meet with us a couple of weeks ago, and I'll be meeting with them again tomorrow. But I think that with us, that the city of Charleston is known as the holy city, and some of these, white institutions benefited tremendously from the free work of my ancestors. And, I think it only makes sense that they also participate and help bridging some of those gaps. So that's going to be part of the conversation that we have tomorrow. Something else that kind of sort of came to mind was the city basically using whatever resources that it has to kind of sort of have this like outreach program or some type of fundraising mechanism every year to where they find, they just go out and they have this like great ball, this like grand time, and they get the who's who of Charleston, and they, you come out every year and you write a check that goes to this fund. Another thing that came up was basically establishing the fund and having a mechanism basically built on the city's website to where people can just contribute money directly to the fund. We saw that maybe it was Evanston, Illinois. I can't remember, but you can actually go to their city's website and click on a link and contribute to their reparations fund. So there's probably people out there that have a lot of energy for this work and want to be out there in the streets marching, raising money or whatever. But then you probably also have people that just want to write a check. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with you just wanting to write a check. I think we need to create some type of way in which we can capture everybody, give everybody an opportunity to be able to contribute to the cause.
Thanks, Alan. Welcome back, Mayor.
Am I back with you? I'm so sorry. My computer at home just dropped service for some reason. I apologize.
Yeah, we hear you.
My question was, what about asking Optus Bank just to open a branch here? That might be an easier lift to get started. They had talked about doing a commercial office, but they got funded recently with a good slug of capital from somewhere, I forget where. And maybe we could just talk them into expanding here. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. And it wouldn't hurt to ask, I guess. Would there be any, opportunity, or are there any spaces that the city would have available to kind of sort of help and entice them to this area?
Possibly. Yeah. I tried to offer them an office space, not a retail space, year before last, but they weren't ready yet or something that didn't suit them. But it might be, now that they got that nice capital infusion, it might be time to go back to them. The other thing I was going to mention, I just ran into him last week. I thought was fabulous news, and I'm meeting with him tomorrow. Do y'all know Herbert Drayton?
Yeah, I do know Herbert Drayton. Yeah,
he's starting a equity fund with an initial goal of 15 million for Black businesses. And anyway, I'll meet with him tomorrow and see if there's any way we can cooperate with him. So, by the way, thanks. I think a lot of these recommendations are terrific, and you're spot on. We realize we need to do a better job on tracking information, even in our own procurement program. It's something I've been working on for a little bit, but we hadn't gotten there yet. I got to admit it. But the other thing that I'm not at the point yet where I would say I'm uplifted, but I was encouraged. Earlier today, I met with the Chamber of Commerce. They trying to rekindle our relationship, and this is something I've been talking with them about for some time. But I think with all the events of the last year, that they've really gotten a little more serious. In fact, that led to them hiring Kenya, who's been on your committee, right?
Yep. Yes, sir.
So she was reviewing their goals of having not just a city minority business database, but having a regional tri-county one, and them keeping it up and keeping it current and keeping it vetted, and then going to the community, as I have always thought would be a great idea, because we can't do this just on the backs of government, of going to the private business community and asking businesses to pledge to do businesses with those minority firms. The one thing I added to the discussion today was ask them to have some accountability and set goals and percentages. And as you had recommended, Alvin, like I had seen last week, to set a goal for a number of new businesses. And again, this is talking Berkeley, Dorchester, Charleston counties, and not just the city of Charleston. And I think that's the kind of we really need. It needs to be regional, and that they were also planning on starting an accelerator program, not a physical location, but just you probably know all about this. Kenya's probably mentioned it in their meeting.
Yeah, they actually presented to us last week.
They did.
Yeah.
But
So.
this is all positive and right in sync with what we're coming out with at the same time. So you know, if we can expand ourselves, you know, multiply ourselves, and do it not just in the city goal, but have a regional business goal. And Councilmember Waring here, he used to be president of the Chamber of Commerce. Reconnect with some of your old friends there, Councilmember, and help spur this along. I think the time is right to really get some specifics going. So thank you for your good work and recommendations. And I was fine at the meeting last week. I'm like a duck, you know, and the water sometimes just got to flow down your back, you know?
Yeah. Yes, sir. These are very difficult, you know, I mean, they aren't easy conversations. I mean, we have a lot of people that are very passionate about this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just, you know, want to thank you again for, you know, coming and just contributing.
But they mentioned like they had additional recommendations that wasn't on your list. If you could call those out, I'm more than interested to hear what they are.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We will be potentially adding some more, and once we do that, then we'll certainly get them over to Amber, and Amber be able to get them out to the group. So certainly, I mean, it's like I said earlier, like economic empowerment. Like, where do you stop, right? That's the difficult task. Where
this
do you
is
stop?
The hardest part, y'all, and you look at the. I don't need to tell y'all, this is the choir, but if you look at the disparity numbers of income and wealth, they're no better than they were in 1964 when the Civil Rights Act passed. They're the same or worse. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
If you look at income and wealth, it hadn't moved.
Well, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, go ahead, Keith.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously appreciate the mayor's comments, and his points are very good points. But one of the things you spoke about earlier, Alvin, was capital, access to capital. And I do believe the city, it's the first time the mayor, and probably, I know Councilman Appel and Zach was hearing this, but you know, one of the things some of the younger folk brought up during our hard budget negotiations with the mayor was selling some excess properties. The city has a number of properties, and obviously we're not using. So when these properties come back on the tax roll, if we sell them to the private sector, we generate revenue, as well as putting properties back on the tax roll. It may be possible to take some of those proceeds, Mr. Mayor, to begin setting up a revolving low interest loan fund. And then we reach out to our allies and we say, what are allies? So we have sister corporation that's like CPW. Now they can't take ratepayer money to do it, but they have some, let's call it non-qualified revenues that they possibly could. They actually use some right now that they give to, Mr. Mayor, what's the current name? It used to be Charleston County Health and Human Services, but they have a new name. I think it's Palmetto.
Palmetto Action.
Palmetto Action, okay. Right now, when people have trouble paying their light bills, CWS actually gives on an annual basis monies for people to go get a grant to help pay water bills. That's not what I'm after. They can also maybe give towards this revolving loan fund. Okay. Then we go to Dominion and pull Danny Cassis in. They used to give money towards sustainability. They used to give $500,000 a year towards Sustainability Institute, which would help low to moderate families weatherize their homes. Well, the Sustainability Institute, I don't think they kind of defunct, but the mere fact is the SC&G and Dominion have been big allies of the International African American Museum. And if the city were to lead with contributions into this revolving loan fund, in particular for business needs, you find that the AT&Ts, the Dominions, the CWSs, I should say, will contribute into that. And then you get into the bank money centers account. For instance, the foundations for the Wells Fargo's of the world, they have an arm where they give into community. Wells Fargo used to be on the board of Wells Fargo, used to put back in the community $300,000-400,000 a year just through community giving. But if the city leads with a revolving loan fund like that, I think you're going to find that that's going to, you'd be shocked what you could do when you get $4 or $5 million in a revolving loan fund, in particular for bridge loans. One of the biggest allies, and believe it or not, creators of affordable housing, is something that's not even recognized in this city, is the African Americans out there who renovate homes and apartment buildings to rent to the Section 8 system. When the S&Ls went into trouble after the Great Recession, S&Ls primarily loaned into creation of houses. When they got absorbed by the B of A's of the world and the Wells Fargo's of the world and the Citibanks of the world, big banks don't do that. So they just simply tell you, we don't do those type loans. So that niche, if you will, I can't tell you how many African Americans around this town, all this county, has land or lots with infrastructure right up to the property line, but they don't have the capital to go vertical. And the moment they go vertical, then they're going to qualify for permanent financing. But getting from that raw lot with utilities at the property line to building that duplex or building that quadruplex or even building that single family house is where that revolving loan fund can come in. The moment you do that, you help create jobs for people like Tracy was talking about, that carpenter or that plumber or that electrician who doesn't have that bonding, but can get that job in their own community. We can create that economy with that type creativity with that loan fund. Of course, you get grant writers and things like that. Maybe you get some grants as well involved, but you'd be shocked with just having you leverage a $4 or $5, $5 to $10 million. But that leadership can be created by the city of Charleston. I can remember when Mayor Tecklenburg came in. If you would have asked us how many affordable housing projects that the city had, you probably can count them on. This is my right hand, and I would have had a couple of extra fingers. Today, you need multiple hands to count the projects that's going on right now. And that's because I got to give the mayor credit. He's led on that, and that has been a city-wide objective, not a department objective. I mean, a city-wide objective. To the point now, I would say if we're not the leading city with affordable housing, maybe Greenville. Greenville's doing some innovative ideas up there, but housing is so important until we track it as an economic measurement monthly in this country, because housing creates jobs. It creates jobs for the attorneys, the surveyors, Home Depots and Lowe's of the world. They sell supplies. And right now, we need that renewable source. So when I say a revolving loan fund and capital, so people can, we got more projects than we got money to put into them. So that's why you're going to need something revolving and something that's going to be renewable that multiple entities can give into, in particular when they see results. So second thing is the LDC has been revitalized through the city. Ms. Doran can speak about that. One of the aspects they're adding on to is something called a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution. Those are very powerful things. And with the advent of, we have one in Charleston at the LDC. Got a great director over there, but I got some bad news for everybody on here. He's been hired by a headhunter, and he's going to a much larger entity. Steve Saltzman, Mr. Mayor, is going to hire. I know, man.
Oh no!
That's terrible.
It is terrible.
That's
Tracy can tell you that.
Where
She's
is he going?
to New Hampshire. They have a huge, one of the leading CDFIs in the country is in New Hampshire, and he's been headhunter.
Not surprised. He's so good.
He is so good.
Turned around our relationship, and
that's right.
But at least he set the stage for it to.
That's right. He set the stage for that relationship to be reknitted with the city. Now we got to recruit a good director to come back with hopefully some skill sets, and I'll go backwards to where we were. But CDFI will get additional funding under the Biden administration, which will give funding to micro businesses and brown and African-American businesses. That's their primary objective in this country. So somehow the LDC, along with its CDFI, has to be part of this economic equation moving forward. So, and believe it or not, Ms. Willis, I should say Butler Willis, the hospitals can come in as well. I mean, the Roberson Francises of the world. I don't know so much out of medical U, because they're kind of bounded by state guidelines and things like that. But certainly Roberson Francis being one of the largest economic engines in this region. I used to be on that board over there about 9 years, not quite a decade. Of course, now just about everybody's going over there that I knew. But anyway.
Mr. Ware, we have a renewed focus to diversity and inclusion here at Roper St. Francis, so it certainly could be an opportunity.
There you go. So see, when you look at some of the largest employers, the utility companies, the in this case, Roper St. Francis, the CDFI, the city has to lead, of course. And if you say, where do we get that money from? We're gonna have to be creative. Probably will come some from right now, Mr. Mayor, I think, and Ross, if you think anything better, or Jason, probably some excess real estate sales that it's a twofer. We put it back on the property tax books, and then the city gets some of its equity. After we had that meeting, by the way, and you all made mention, it wasn't me, but some of the newer members of council made mention of possible selling excess properties. I don't know about you, Mr. Mayor, but I got a number of calls from private people in the private sector telling us the properties they'd like to purchase. So that's great potential.
Telling you what? I'm sorry?
Asking us, telling me the piece of properties that they would like to buy from the city. So I think that's something that can be engaged this year, and funds begin to be fed into some sort of revolving fund in this fiscal year. So I think we can have some action steps this year. So I think all this is great. And you're right, we can go to some of our business allies and at the chamber. I mean, namely, we need to get some of the stakeholders like Anita Zucker and her team involved, because they're going to come up with additional creativity that none of us have thought about. So getting the right people around the table will we'll create the capital that can be organized to do what we're talking about doing on this committee. So thanks.
Thank you, Keith.
Joe.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I got to sign off for a 6:30 commitment. And Alvin, thank you for the good work, and thanks to all the commissioners for what we got going here. Good work on this.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor, for joining.
Yeah, thank you.
Providing input.
Yes, sir.
We've only got 4 more minutes left. I know Councilman Appel's on as well. Ross, any thoughts, reactions?
Sure. And Alvin, thank you for that presentation. I thought it was very informative. And Keith, of course, as always, your perspective is so helpful and interesting, and got my mind thinking about a variety of different ideas. And I wanted maybe just to toss another thought out there that we can maybe pick up at another date. But I read a book recently called The Color of Law by a guy named Richard Rothstein out from the West Coast. And are y'all familiar with that book?
I'm familiar with him.
Yeah, it's a extremely eye-opening account of how as Alvin mentioned, I mean, the issue of generational wealth is really something that has disproportionately impacted African Americans in recent times. We're not talking about hundreds of years ago, ancient history. For example, I mean, I live in Burns Downs, one of the nicer, up and expensive, neighborhoods. My neighbor bought her house for $80,000, back in not too long ago. Now it's probably worth close to 400,000, right? That's how wealth gets created over time. And what this book does is it goes through really, from the World War I era, New Deal, through World War II, how the federal and state governments subsidized and got the private housing industry started in this country through a variety of federal programs, incentives, things of that nature. Almost all of them were overtly racist and discriminatory. I mean, you could not move into these neighborhoods if you were African American. You could not qualify for these loans.
Undesirable.
This predates redlining and things like that. So when I hear reparations, and we all know how controversial that is, and sort of what storm that creates politically, I don't think you have to go back to the 1700s and the 1800s. Like, you can go back to the 1940s, 50s, and 60s and talk about people that are still living today that were overtly, explicitly racially discriminated against through major government actions and subsidies. I mean, government injections into the marketplace to allow housing, the private housing market, that private lending markets to function. There's neighborhoods in this community that were the direct recipients of this type of aid. And you had African American soldiers in World War II coming back to America, where their fellow brothers in arms were able to get a house, start building that generational wealth, move into the suburbs, start the American dream. Whereas African Americans were locked out of that stuff, not through some private scheme, but through overt public government discrimination. I think when you start making the reparations argument, tacking it to that more recent conduct that is so clear and so, this is not the fog of history. This is yesterday, relatively speaking. And that's what that book goes through. And the book really builds a case for reparations based upon this history. And I think it's just fascinating and eye-opening, and it gets to questions along the lines of our development policies, land use, affordable housing, things of that nature. I just throw that off as kind of a food for thought as we continue this discussion, because it's a really eye-opening picture into the world that not many people have a very it's not in the public consciousness, this history. There's just this, when you start factoring into this, start, going down these rabbit holes, you start reading this book, you start looking at the world a lot differently. And I just think that the more we can do to sort of project this perspective into the public discourse, I think it'd be helpful as we move forward. So
let me add on to that. If you all will go to C-SPAN and please pull up it's a segment, a show where Ta-Nehisi Coates is interviewing Mr. Rothstein about the same book that Ross is speaking to. I mean, it's fascinating, man. It's one of those things you look at again. How many people know where the Sergeant Jasper is? Remember, it's on the corner of Lockwood and Broad?
Sure.
Okay. That was affordable housing for white people. I mean, the program, the money that the beach company got to build the original Sergeant Jasper Hotel is now, boy, it's something fabulous now. The original money that the CEO of the former beach company got from the federal government to buy the land and build that 15 story building was, I mean, that's the way it was worded, affordable housing for white people. This was after World War II. So we were left out of that. We couldn't move in that place back then. But anyway, I'm telling you, that's fascinating book that I hadn't read the book. I did see the show. I have been meaning to get the book. But anyway, thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, thanks.
I just downloaded the book on my iPad while you were talking about it, Ross, because Carol Jackson told me to read that book too. And on that, Keith, when you were talking about the Sergeant Jasper, the Isle of Palms, my husband's family had a little house on the Isle of Palms, and it was in their deed that it could not be transferred to a person of color, and people of color couldn't be on the Isle of Palms after a certain time at night.
Listen, Arthur McFarlane lives on Grove Street. When he bought his house on Grove Street, it had that in the deed.
Yeah.
And those deeds were required by the federal government to qualify for FHA loans. I mean, they would not greenlight a suburb. If a developer came in and said, I want to develop 200 lots, the developer had to have these FHA loans in order to move those products. This was before Rocket Mortgage, Quicken Loans. Like, the only mortgage in the country for regular people was through the federal government. It just was not a mature mortgage market. The underwriting guidelines required those racial restrictive covenants. I mean, this stuff is, from the federal government, the Federal Housing Authority, and it's not ancient history. And it's just a remarkable story that is not in the public consciousness. And to Keith's point, you can save yourself some money and a lot of time. There's videos of this guy on YouTube for about an hour. You can get the gist of it pretty quick. It's just very, very informative, and it's helped kind of guide my thinking on some of these issues. And I think that, a big upshot of this case is he thinks that like a case can be made that there's like legal claims and violations, like violations of the Civil Rights Act. I mean, when all this stuff was happening, we had a 14th Amendment. We had civil rights era laws, not the stuff from the 1960s, but there were still things on the books that you could have read to prohibit this kind of stuff. But you get into some very complicated legal issues about intent and impact and things of that nature, which is very complicated. But this is a very emerging kind of conversation that's very eye-opening, and it's just and like y'all said, it's here. I mean, that's the same folks, J.C. Long, they developed Burns Downs that I was talking about earlier. And that wealth that they garnered through that process allowed them to get involved in all kinds of stuff around the country, Kiowa and all this kind of stuff. And it just shows how you can leverage this stuff up over time. And last thing I'll say, I promise I'll be quiet, is my friend and client and Vince Graham, the guy that developed Ion and some other really notable developments in the area, he's actually like spent hundreds and hundreds of hours like going through old newspaper articles in the city of Charleston and records and deeds. He's like put all this stuff up. Have you ever seen those like, crime shows where like they've got the pictures on the wall with like all the red strings connected to everyone? He's got it all figured out, and it's a fascinating story that sort of takes the themes in the narrative from Rothstein's book and sort of applies it here to Charleston and North Charleston and the surrounding areas, that we know these neighborhoods, we know these developers, we know how all this happened. And I think it's just a very interesting subject area. So thank y'all again, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. And
last note on that, if I can add, if Vince Graham if we're inviting him to speak to housing and mobility, I mean, is that a topic that should be the whole commission?
Yes. That was going to be my final point, Tracy, was two things. One was to Keith's point and Ross's point, as we move past these interim reports and head towards final recommendations, I think it's imperative that we get a list of some of these folks that can present to the entire commission and dare I say, all of council. If we're going to be talking about these issues in council and voting on them, the point that Ross makes and Councilman Waring makes are more salient than anything, because when you think about the impacts, the argument that we will get moreover about reparations and the work we're doing is, oh, that was 300 years ago. And I hear it all the time. But when you make the point that this was contemporary, this is literally yesterday, to Ross's point, I think that is an argument, and that's a discussion that council deserves, but I think it needs to be for all of council. So I think we need to get some of these folks to the committee meetings and present to the entire commission. And Alvin, just to circle back and we'll conclude, you started today's discussion on your interim around funding. And I think, from Councilman Waring's point and the mayor's point, we're back to it. And I think if we can focus on one thing over the next short term, is let's get these players to the table. Let's leverage the relationships that we have with Councilman Waring and the chamber. You did mention you were trying to reach out to Helen Hill. One of my recommendations was let's get the chamber on board, and the city has to lead. And I know Councilman Waring and Councilman Appel both articulated that. If the city leads with money, I do think it's going to be much easier to secure some additional funding. And just to finalize, Elvin, you had mentioned some sort of signature event, what we call a fundraiser, but that signature event can entirely be focused on the messaging of the match. So the city's going to put in whatever money. Your challenge is to match the city, and that could be the theme and concept for that type of event. And to Councilman Waring's point, $3, $4, $5 million in a revolving loan fund, it starts to add up. So I think everything I've heard tonight in terms of your recommendations, Elvin, the one thing that to me is the most powerful is getting off the ground with the funding source. And I think you can attest that most of your subcommittee members are focused on that, right?
Yeah, I'll probably say 99.9%.
Right. Show me the money, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I'll just say this real quick, Jason. Yeah, I mean, $4, $5, $10 million is great. I really think that there's a lot of energy out there, and that there are people that will be willing to come to the table if they just saw some of their friends coming to the table as well. We just got to get it out there. I really think that we would be surprised at how the city of Charleston, the folks of this city, respond to this effort if we do a good job of, getting the information out there, public outreach campaign, taking control of the narrative. I really think that we would surprise ourselves. So,
I agree. John, you had a comment?
Two, yes. One, let's not limit ourselves for the matching funds conversation. If we're going to do that, it needs to be something where the city bona fides a certain amount and says, hey, this is how much we're guaranteeing, and then saying, hey, we're challenging you and saying, if you guys exceed this limit, we'll match you. That's probably a better way to do it. So you're not already putting a cap on what that fundraising goal or looks like. The second thing that I had to say was, to be blunt, this is the type of stuff where we have to hear from the white members of the commission and the white persons that are kind of involved with this process. What parts are salient to you? because I could sit and talk to you till I'm blue in the face about any of the items that are kind of talked about here tonight. And you might have noticed that most of the Black persons that are listening onto this call, we kind of understood all of that already. And like, that's kind of, I mean, Councilman Sacco, we had this conversation last year back when I was with the city, and I was telling you about, you know, the reason why it's such a difficult process for me to get a home loan. And, you know, you mentioned, you know, that's not your story, and that's fine, but the fact that we're talking about, you know, what Councilman Appel mentioned, where his neighbor who had bought their house for $80,000 now has what, $320,000 worth of equity into that house that they can do whatever with. Their kids don't have to get a loan to buy a house. You see what I'm saying? Like, that's just part of the story. So kind of whatever points are the most salient to you guys, that's what we really need to understand, because I can tell you about that. I can tell you about things that go back 350 years. I can tell you about things that go back further than that in South Carolina, in this region, you know, because let's not forget that Black people were here before 1670 in the Beaufort area. So, you know, we can dig real deep into the history, and we can talk about the injustices that have gone on. But until we're really realizing what's going to make the most sense to get something done now, we'll just keep throwing the factoids out there until something sticks, because that's really all we can do is just keep shouting.
Thank you, John.
One last thing I agree with everything you said, John. I tell you one other thing as I sit here and think about it. Every bank board in this area has a board of advisors that you pull that off the line. We need to pull off every bank board. I think there are like 15 or 16 banks in the area, board of advisors. And let's see what minority members are on those boards. And we need to talk to them so they can carry our message into the bank board meetings. Okay. Same thing with Ropus and Francis, because we have Kimberly on the line. She would do that, but certainly I think Roberta Pinckney and McKelvey, I think, is on the actual big board. You got the system board, and then you got the little hospital board. But get the people on the system board, they're going to get that voice. It's nothing like what we're trying to do being proposed by a board member to the CEO of a corporation. And then lastly, we need to get into the CEO roundtable. We have a CEO roundtable in the Charleston area. Again, I call my friend Anita Zucker. They'd help us get into that as well, or maybe even the Lynn Hutchisons of the world. So we have access to those areas. We need to kind of get this thing structured so they can say, make sense, and this is how we can help it grow. So anyway.
Mr. Waring, I'll add, every time I hear Rope St. Francis, I'm like, let me add in. Edward McKelvey is who sits on our larger board, and he's actually a VP for South State Bank.
Right. Oh, listen, man, I remember when he was a new loan officer at First Federal Bank. I mean, then, they got absorbed by South State. So yeah, we got the relationships. We got to find a way to coalesce it. That's right.
Amber, anything else that I'm forgetting, or I just want to be respectful of our time. We're about 15 minutes over.
I think we covered everything.
Okay. Anything else you want to report out to the team?
I think last time we talked about Kellogg and that application was being led by the Y. We are still participating in that. And we've requested some funding through that process. And I think that's it.
Right. One thing I do want to mention just quickly before we depart, Amber, myself, Dudley, and Mike had a conversation today. And I think it's important, particularly these conversations, that we're able to and are allowed to share authenticity and things that I'm feeling. This is the third meeting that I've chaired. And after coming off the second meeting 2 weeks ago, I'm going to just be honest with you all. I had a dynamic in my head thinking, here's a white council member chairing this commission. I'm not sure if you've all thought that, but I want to acknowledge that and say I'm honored to do this work with you all. And I'm learning, and every day I talk to Amber and Dudley and Mike, I learn more. So I'm not perfect, and I just want to be able to say to you all that I'm honored, I'm proud, and knowing that we need to have a safe space sometimes and be able to share things, because I have questions, and And Amber will tell you, and when John was with the city, you know, those are great discussions for me to be able to share what I'm thinking and push back, and then they push back on me, and it's helped. So I just want to say I'm proud of the work that we're doing together, and just wanted to acknowledge that I recognize the dynamic, and I'm not sure if you all did, but I did. So.
If I can just add, Jason, I've had this conversation with Melissa Evans and with Otha Meadows, and Otha told me he didn't hold it against me because I'm white. I mean, I've had the same conversations. Is my committee holding back because I'm the chair? And, you know, how is our dynamic working? And, you know, what am I bringing to the table? So I'm with you. I'm feeling challenged, and I'm happy to be able to be authentic in these conversations, and I'm glad to be a part of the process.
Thank you.
Can I add two?
To be a true,
Yes.
yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, one, the revolution needs white people.
Oh,
And
yeah.
two, there's nothing more exciting than a chance to challenge and stretch white people in this conversation. So thank you for being here. Your presence is important, because if we can't articulate it outside of our community, we certainly can't see it outside of our community.
Thank you.
Well, one
Yeah,
last,
and-
I want to thank Alvin and what he's done. I mean, it was some good work that you've done. Matter of fact, man, that was great. So thank you for what you do, and keep. All I can say is keep up the good work.
I wish I could take all of the credit for that, but I have 7 subcommittee members that are outstanding, dedicated to the process. And like I mentioned to the mayor earlier, we're a very passionate group. And I'm not gonna say that nobody's safe in our space, but you will definitely come into our space and be uncomfortable. Because if you're doing this work and if you haven't been uncomfortable yet, then I just have to say that the work hasn't started yet. So, but yes, thanks for the opportunity. I'm grateful to lead, and my subcommittee makes it easy for me to lead. They're a great group of people.
Yeah, that's what true CEOs do. You know, I don't care how good a CEO is. You give them some recognition. The first thing they do is recognize the people, who helped them achieve whatever accomplishment it was. So,
And hire people smarter than you, right?
That's right, man. That's what Howard Hughes did, right?
So, anything else for the good of the order tonight?
Oh, man.
All right. Well, y'all have a good night. Thank you for the input.